Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys how you can set up and use 2D lights inside of the Godot engine for obviously a 2D game as well. If you like what I do and you want more game development content or assets, consider checking out my Ko-Fi page, which will have the link in the description. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with this video. So I already have a 2D side-scrolling scene set up, and as you can see with this shop here, there's two lanterns here which we could use to add a light source to our scene. So if I go to my main scene level here, woods level, and I right-click and do Add Child Node, we can search for Light2D, and you'll see that there are two options for Light2D here. There's directional lights, which work great as a global light. You could think of it as the sun pointing down at your scene and setting the base light. And then there are point lights when you want light to emit from a certain point inside of your scene, such as the location where your lantern is at. And then you can define how your light shape is going to look by setting it up with one of many different texture options. So when I create the point light, I'd like to add it to these two lanterns here. So it actually makes sense if we do that inside of the shop scene itself. So I'm going to jump into the scene for the shop, open an editor, and we can right click here to add a new point light. So I'm going to add a child node, and we want to search Light2D. There's two options here, DirectionalLight2D, which works great for stuff like the sun when you want to set the tone for the entire scene, and then point light when you have light emitting from a single point on the scene, which would come from a very obvious light source like a lantern. So let's choose PointLight2D, double click that. Now it's going to immediately pop into the 0, position here, and you can see that there's nothing yet. That's because we need to add a texture to the point light. You can even hover over the little warning and see that, yeah, that's the case. You need to have a texture. So go over to the right side, Inspector, and look at Texture. We're going to click on this drop down. There's a bunch of different options here you can use. So if you wanted to create a shape for your light, you could do that through a program like Sprite and literally create an image texture and then layer that in here to be the base shape for your point light. But we're going to do New Gradient Texture 2D so that we can just create our shape right in the editor. New Gradient Texture 2D. So by default, this is going to look like a box, but we can actually turn that into a simple radial circle shape. So to do that, expand texture gradient over here on the right, and there's a fill option. Click on that. You go down here, you change the fill from linear to radial. So the center of the radial circle is up here in the top left corner, and then the other areas, what fills in the rest, is the top right point right here. So first, let's actually reverse these colors. So where we have the circle, that's where the light is, and then the other area will be the black transparency. So let's expand gradient here, and I'm just going to start by reversing these two color points. So you can just left click, drag them, and I'm going to put the white on the left and the black pretty close to the right, but I'm actually not going to have it all the way. I can put it there for right now just so you can see. So let's take the top left point and move that into the center now. And you'll kind of see our problem where part of the white light gets cut off by this gradient box. So to fix that, we can drag this black color in a bit more so that it will cover more of the image. And then there's no cutoff for any part of the white circle, which is our actual light emission. Now to make sure it's perfectly centered, we can go down to fill and just take the from and make sure that's 0.5 for X and 0.5 for Y. So then you have a perfectly centered circle light shape. So now let's take this point light and let's move this down and to the right where we have the lantern. Right about there. Okay, so next I want to change the color of this lantern light from a pure white to more of an orange. I'm going to move this interactable shape out of the way so that it's not showing in front. So I'll just put that in the back. Okay, now we can see everything a lot clearer. So the PointLight2D, let's go down and change the color inside of the Light2D options. So we have color and energy. When you want your light to be brighter, you can increase the energy. Obviously, it's very easy to get way overkill. 1.0 is actually a pretty good value for the energy. Okay, so let's change the color now. I'm going to click on color, and let's actually just use the eyedropper tool to pick out a color from the scene. I'll just grab the lantern color itself. So let's press the eyedropper, then go over to the scene and pick a color. I'll just grab this yellowish color from the lantern itself. And now you'll see that the color this area is emitting is actually matching the lantern better. So if I increase the energy, you can see that's a lot more obvious. So I'm going to change this back to 1.0 energy for right now. And I also want a copy of this light to be over here on the left. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate it. And let's just adjust the position right over here to the left. I'm going to Control S to save the scene. and let's go back to the woods level. So back there, you can see our lights here, and you can kind of see the light affecting the guy over here as well. If I select him and I move him around, then you'll see that the light affects or does not affect the sprite depending on the location. So another thing to keep in mind is that you can control which layers and which Z positions for your sprites that the lights will actually affect. So if I jump back into my shop scene and I look at these two lights, I'll shift select so that I edit them together. Then you can see in range, we have Z min and Z max, and then we have layer min and layer max. So if you set a range of like layers 1 through 5, then that light is only going to affect things that are on layer 1 through 5. Or what I think might be a little bit more useful is Z min and Z max. So you can position your 2D objects behind or in front of each other by using a Z value. So if you want your light to only affect background objects, let's just assume 0 is your base ground, then you can say that your Z max is going to be -1. So now it's only going to affect anything that is behind Z max of 1. And you can see immediately that the shop is no longer lit. If I click on the shop words, we can go down to, not transform, ordering, I believe. And the Z index here is set to 0 by default. So maybe I want to change that to something like -100. And you can see that the lights come back. So now you can imagine how these lights are only affecting the background elements of the scene. And maybe in reverse, you'd only want lights that affect where the players are on Z index 0, or maybe even things that are in the foreground showing in front of your player with a Z index above 1 or 100. Or you could even have a light that only affects your foreground if you so desired. So back on the main scene, you can see that the light isn't affecting the character over here. If I show the Z index ordering, it's 0. If I make it -1, now the light affects them. So pretty simple there. But for those lights, I'm going to make them for right now just affect basically all the Z range, -1000 to +1000. And I'll save that again. So let's go ahead and run the scene, and we'll see when I move into the area over here that our character is lit. When I leave the area, it just reverts to the base color of the character, and over here once again. So you can obviously see that lighting an already fully lit character is basically a little bit bright and overblown. So one thing you could do is darken your scene by default. So let's add a global light that actually darkens the scene by default, making it look a little bit more like nighttime. I'm going to right click on Woods level, add a child node. This time we'll do a DirectionalLight2D. So double click on that. Immediately you'll see everything is way too bright. So what we need to do is change the blend mode here from add, which adds color value, to all of the sprites in the scene, all of the tilemap tiles and so on. And we're going to change this to subtract. Now when we do that, everything's going to go basically pitch black, except for this area, which is being lit by that other light. So the lights kind of interact with each other in that sense. And we want to have something in between being fully base lit and this silhouette style. So let's take the energy value and lower that down to something like 0.4, 0.5. Now this color is also a little bit boring. What we might want to do is change the color we're subtracting from a pure white, all of the colors, to more of a red. So let's enter the color wheel, pull down on the brightness selector over here, and let's shift the color we're subtracting over towards red. So when we remove the red, we're going to make everything a lot more of a green blue. And let's get shifted over towards the color rather than brightness. Okay, exit out of that color selection, and maybe we increase the energy again. And yeah, okay, with something like a 0.7, we can obviously see that everything in the scene looks a lot more blue-green. So something like that could give us something of an illusion of nighttime. And now the lanterns actually make a lot more sense. So let's hit play and see how that looks with the new color changes. So we'll walk into the light, and our character is now much more visibly lit. And we leave the lantern area and back to that blue color. So that's just a couple basic ideas of how you can use 2D lights inside of your Godot game. So that's going to be it for this video. Once again, if you liked what you saw in the video, check out my Ko-Fi page. It's in the description. Thanks for watching to the end, and I will see all of you in my future video content.